Wait a minute. Am I actually uploading consistently now? Never thought I'd see the day. So my last video was a bit of a tribute to MatPat, a mix of theory and video essay. However, I decided as a bit of a companion piece to that video, I should release a full-blown theory video on what else Five Nights at Freddy's. And I'm going to approach it in the most MatPat way imaginable, making connections that many people might call crazy, but being confident in them regardless. So we gotta start at Midnight Motorist. Midnight Motorist is a minigame in FNAF 6, which has caused a lot of confusion in the FNAF community, and it has led to a wide array of interpretations as to what it could possibly mean. For a brief explanation of Midnight Motorist, I'll play some MatPat clips, because he is good at explaining things.
It starts simple enough. A top-down racer game, but glitch through an opening in the bottom of the track, and suddenly you're on a rainy drive through a rural tree-filled landscape, visiting a bar named Junior's, and eventually making your way to a lonely house hidden deep in the woods. Out pops the driver, and he's orange? He charges into the house and rages at the fact that someone, presumably his son, has locked himself in his room. He goes around the back to find a way in, only to discover that the window is broken with a set of footprints and some bear tracks, leading to, quote, that place again.
But there's some other weird details about Midnight Motorist as well. Like there's some random set of three-toed footprints on the ground, which seemingly would either come from an animatronic or a suit. Then you have the fact that the person in the chair claims the runaway kid had a rough day, and you also have the orange guy going up to some random mound of dirt. Another weird detail about the minigame is that it actually has a connection to another minigame from FNAF 6 known as Security Puppet, which depicts the death of Charlie, William Afton's first victim, and the moment she possessed the puppet. And that connection actually comes from the game files.
But here's the detail I was missing before. If you brighten up the final screen of the Security Puppet minigame, you'll see tire tracks left by the purple car driving away from his crime. This leads directly to the events of Midnight Motorist, which happens immediately after his murder. Here's how we know this for sure. Not only are you driving a purple car, and not only is it raining in both of the minigames, so they're connected on both those fronts, but get this. Reddit user GB Aura found that this section of the game in the source files is titled Later That Night, giving us the time connection we needed to know 100% that orange guy is William Afton. He killed Charlotte in the rain outside of Fredbear's, drives away, and winds up back home later that night.
This has led many people to speculate that the orange guy is in fact William Afton speeding away from the crime scene. Under this logic, it's likely that the person sitting in the chair watching TV is Michael Afton, as we see Michael Afton watching TV in Sister Location, and the runaway child is probably the crying child running off to that place again, and that place is probably Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. After all, he has Freddy Fazbear's plushies that he calls his friends. But what is this minigame actually trying to tell us about the Afton family? Let's start at the random set of footprints right outside the crying child's window. They are three-toed footprints that would either come from an animatronic or a person wearing these spring-lock suits. Now, it's obviously not going to be a possessed animatronic because this Midnight Motorist minigame is taking place the same night as the death of Charlie, and she was the first person to ever possess an animatronic, meaning it is likely somebody wearing one of the spring-lock suits outside the crying child's window. But why? Well, according to the orange guy, the crying child has run off to that place before. As he notes, he ran off to that place again. So clearly the parents of the crying child would want to keep the crying child in the house so he's not running off to Fazbear's. What would be a way to do that? Instead of having the crying child go to his friends in the pizzeria, they could bring his friends to the house, stand outside of the crying child's window in one of the spring-lock suits, do a performance for him, and give him no reason to run off to the establishment. I don't think William Afton is a good enough parent to be doing something like that, although he does have access to the suits because he works there. However, what about Mrs. Afton? William Afton's wife, who doesn't have a great deal of presence in the franchise? My theory is that Mrs. Afton would stand outside the crying child's window, putting on performances as Spring Bonnie, wearing the Springlock suit to keep the crying child in his room and to keep him from running away. However, on the night of Midnight Motorist, something terrible happens. It rains. Now, Midnight Motorist and Security Puppet both depict it raining. And as we all know, a little bit of moisture can cause the spring locks to fail. So while Mrs. Afton is performing outside of the crying child's window, the rain causes her to experience multiple and simultaneous spring lock failures, leading to her death. That's right, I think Mrs. Afton died while performing as Spring Bonnie. Now, what has led me to this conclusion? Well, if Midnight Motorist is a puzzle, then this theory connects all of the pieces together. The footprint is relevant, the three-toed footprints, because it is Mrs. Afton in the Spring Bonnie suit standing outside the crying child's window. The fact that the crying child ran away is relevant because that's the reason she was out there in the suit. The rain caused the springlock failure. The crying child having a rough day is because he directly witnessed his mother's fatal springlock failure. The mound of dirt is where the mother was buried. Now, I believe the three Afton boys, William Afton, Michael Afton, and the crying child, all dealt with their grief in different ways. Michael resigned to watching television all day and night, as we see in the minigame. William Afton goes to drink his sorrows away at the bar called JR's, and then in his drunken state and in a rage and in grief, he goes to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and we see Charlie become the puppet as a result. He drives away from the scene of the crime. He visits the mound of dirt and mourns the loss of his wife. He goes back to JR's for more to drink, but is turned away at the door. And then he goes home. Michael Afton tells William to leave the crying child alone tonight, but in a rage, he ignores him, and then he discovers that the crying child has run off to that place again, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And his anger at that moment, saying he'll be sorry when he gets back, is because William blames the crying child for what happened to his wife. She was only out there to keep him in the house, and now that his wife is gone, he's running off to Freddy Fazbear's again. All the pieces of the Midnight Motorist puzzle fit together. But it actually also connects to a much larger puzzle, FNAF lore as a whole. In FNAF 4, the crying child is terrified of Freddy Fazbear's, obviously because of what he witnessed. William Afton, through the Fredbear plush, tells the crying child to remember what you saw. And of course what he saw was the fatal springlock failure that took away his mom. And what is seen in the shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. The crying child does not know about the spring locks and what they do. What he thinks he saw was Spring Bonnie itself taking away his mother. That explains why he's so terrified of the Springlock animatronics in the minigame. Furthermore, remember in FNAF 3 when the phone guy talks about an unfortunate incident involving multiple and simultaneous springlock failures?
After learning of an unfortunate incident at the sister location involving multiple and simultaneous springlock failures, the company has deemed the suit temporarily unfit for employees.
What if Phone Guy was referring to the incident that took away Mrs. Afton? The Afton household, of course, is built on top of the sister location bunker, which is used by Fazbear Entertainment, so it makes sense that he would call it the sister location, where it occurred. This would also explain why in the Take Cake minigame, only Fredbear is visible, even though he is typically seen as a duo with Spring Bonnie, The Spring Bonnie suit is not usable on this day because it just experienced a fatal spring lock incident. Furthermore, if Ballora is based on Mrs. Afton like many have speculated, this adds to the theory. We know that William Afton made all the Funtime animatronics, so it is entirely possible that the stuff Ballora says could be a reflection of William's grief over losing her. Consider this line in Ballora's dialogue.
All I see is an empty room, no joy, an empty tomb.
All I see is an empty room, no more joy, an empty tomb. What if this connects to FNAF 4, in which we see an empty room that seems to belong to a girl as it has imagery of flowers and pink? Of course, boys can like pink as well, but that's not the point. What if that room is empty because of the springlock failure that Mrs. Afton experienced? And the mangle in that room represents how Mrs. Afton was mangled and perhaps even dismembered by the multiple and simultaneous springlock failures. It's also worth noting that Baby points out that Ballora does not like pretending, which could represent how William Afton sees the springlock failure. She was pretending to be Spring Bonnie for her son, and that led to her death, which is why Ballora doesn't like to pretend. And Ballora herself being a dancer could show that she is a performer, somebody who performed for the crying child in the springlock suit. And we also see in Help Wanted 1, Glitchtrap dancing almost like a ballerina, which could connect to Mrs. Afton and Ballora. Now, if I haven't lost you already, here's the part where I'll probably lose you, so buckle up. The FNAF 4 box has been speculated on what could possibly be inside. Scott Cawthon has claimed that the contents of the box has changed over the years, and he claims that what's inside the box are the pieces put together. Now, as I've already established, if Mrs. Afton's room is the empty room in FNAF 4 with the Mangle toy, we see the Mangle toy in pieces. Now there is also, in FNAF sister location, imagery in Ballora Gallery of the Ballora animatronic completely dismembered. Imagery connected to Mrs. Afton of dismemberment and needing to be put back together. Could it be that inside the FNAF 4 box are the dismembered pieces of Mrs. Afton from the springlock failure put together, with the box serving as a makeshift coffin and buried in the mound of dirt we see in Midnight Motorist? I think I've officially gone off the rails, so let's end this theory here. I have probably not solved FNAF lore, but it was kind of cool making this regardless. And as always, that's just a theory. An insane theory. Thanks for watching.